Imagine inheriting what you were promised and finding a condition that erases your name. What do you do when the signature that should protect you becomes the blade? This is not only about money. This is about the lie we called family. My name is Beth Carter. I am the eldest daughter of Helen Carter, who spent her life making order out of other people's storms. I am 49, the one who holds the family calendar together, the one who knows where the spare keys live, the one who speaks softly when the room is already full. If you have ever been the eldest, you understand what I mean. You inherit the list before you inherit the house. We gathered at 4 in the afternoon because 4 felt gentle. Blinds laid pale stripes across the dining table, the same wooden surface that had hosted birthday cakes, midnight puzzles, and the kinds of talks that are really treaties with time. The executor arranged a folder with careful hands, and we behaved like we were in church. Aunts, cousins, my father Daniel, who had aged in the last month as if grief had tapped him on the shoulder and asked to live in his bones. My sister Mara, 10 years younger and twice as brave out loud. I took the end chair because that is where my mother sat when she needed to see everyone's face at once. Old habits, old altars. People think wills are about money. They are not. They are about the way love gets counted, the way stories get stacked, the way silence writes itself into the margins. So when the executor cleared his throat and said words like estate, provisions, and personal effects, my chest felt both safe and slightly cheated. Safe, because order is a kind nurse. Cheated, because there are things a document can never carry. The first pages were gentle. My mother gave memory as if it were bread. The blue quilt that smelled like cedar, the Sunday necklace with the crooked clasp, the recipe cards, ink faded at the corners where she had pressed her finger while stirring. We laughed once about the music box that always lost its tune on the last note. For a few minutes we were a family the way families pretend to be in photographs, aligned by sweetness, lit from the best side. Then the temperature of the room shifted 1 quiet degree. The executor turned a page and paused. It was small, but my body noticed. The way birds fall silent before weather they cannot explain. He said there was a condition. He spoke like a man stepping carefully across ice. Condition. Such a simple shape for a word that carries locks. I felt Mara's leg touch mine under the table. My father set his glass down with more care than usual, as if the glass might interpret his mood and break on purpose. I watched the executor's finger follow the sentence as if guiding it into the world. I have never wanted to stop a hand more in my life. The clause named a portion of the estate we had not discussed in the living room world. It assigned it to a recipient it did not yet name out loud. It used phrases like gesture of recognition and as previously arranged and to be held in trust. The sentence did not carry my name. It did not carry Mara's. It walked past us without a glance, like a relative who refuses eye contact when the truth is ready to be told. Aunts shifted. Cousins found their phones and then remembered where they were. No one exploded. Real families do not explode on cue. We inhaled. We paused. We stared through the neat lines, as if the ink would be kind and rearrange itself. I thought of my mother's handwriting. The soft slopes. The letter loops that looked like she was making extra space for anyone who might feel crowded by the alphabet. I thought of the way she used to say, "We will talk about it tomorrow." And then tomorrow would arrive with new dishes to wash and old courage to keep. Some people survive by filing cabinets into their hearts. My mother did. The executor continued, reading through amounts and accounts, doing the work of a man who holds a lantern while other people discover a basement they did not know they owned. I heard about attachments. I heard about a complimentary document. The words "express instruction" touched the table like a small silver key. There would be an envelope. There would be a letter. It would be read at the end, and only to us three. My father, my sister, and me. My aunt lowered the blinds 1 notch, and evening crept closer. I could see dust turning in the light, like tiny messengers delivering news they did not understand. The executor stacked the first pages and reached for the envelope tied with pale ribbon. The paper looked domestic, not official. Notary stamps scare me less than kitchen stationery. Kitchen stationery is where the human part of truth goes to live. He asked for our consent. My father nodded, the slow nod of a man who has held himself together for a month and will keep doing it, because no one taught him another way. Mara squeezed my hand. I said yes aloud because eldest daughters translate gestures into sentences when the room needs clarity. He opened the envelope and drew out 2 pages. The first line began, "My loves." That is how my mother wrote when she wanted to lay down something that weighed more than the words could carry. The executor read slower than before. The law had stepped back. The heart had stepped forward. She wrote about being 18. She wrote about leaving town for a season so that other people could keep their stories neat. She wrote about a pregnancy, a winter of her body, a summer of her heart. 2 seasons that refused to agree. She wrote about being told that the right choice was the quiet choice, and that quiet would look like giving up a child to a plan that had been designed without her voice. She wrote about a signature she had not been allowed to provide, and a leaving that did not include a goodbye. She wrote about the day she learned there are losses the body remembers even when the mouth is never allowed to say the name. The clause made sense now, which did nothing to make it easier. There was a name on the page, a first name and a last name. There was an age. There was the hint of a city that was not ours. There was the phrase, "He could not sign for what was due," which is how my mother chose to say, "You cannot receive what the world pretends you do not exist to receive." My father closed his eyes for the length of one deep breath, and then opened them. He said the name once, tender, as if placing it on the table like bread. Mara's tears came without noise. I did not cry yet. My grief tends to knock first. "This cannot be right," my aunt said softly. She was looking at the letter while she said it, which is how you know denial is a kind of prayer. "This is right," I answered. "It is not what we expected, but it is right." The executor explained the attachments, a timeline, a statement my mother had filed later in life, a contact sheet with counsel who would help us access a safe deposit box. He said gently that our mother had left resources to pursue whatever truth remained findable. He said this with the same tone he had used for dates and amounts, as if kindness were also a line item in the file. When the letter ended, it did not end. It rested. The room tried to remember how to be a room. I picked up the pages my mother had written, and read the line where she used the word recognition. It is the bravest word in the language when you use it honestly. It is the moment a ledger becomes a mirror. We signed the receipts for the documents, a grim irony that did not escape me. We said goodbye to the executor, who left with the grace of someone who knows doors are heavy. Then we stayed in our chairs and looked at one another like survivors counting. I stood first because eldest daughters do. I made the list. Names to call, offices to visit, a timeline of what could be done tomorrow and what would need to wait for the world to put its stamps where we could not. We would go to the attorney in the morning. We would ask to open what my mother had kept for us. We would follow the thread wherever it led, even if it led us out of the family story we thought was final. That night, sleep did not come like mercy. It came like a cat, near, watchful, refusing my invitation. I lay awake with the letter on my chest and whispered the newly revealed name into the dark. It did not echo as a stranger's name would. It settled in the room like a person who had been standing in the doorway for years and finally stepped inside. I am Beth Carter. I am eldest. I am tired. I am ready. Tomorrow would be the keys and the vault and the sound of paper telling the truth at last. Morning arrived without asking how I slept. The world does not stop its practicalities for our revelations. Coffee, shoes, keys, the call to the attorney, the time slot offered, the yes that came from a voice that was mine but sounded borrowed. Mara moved through the kitchen like a tightrope walker learning the line with her feet. My father held a mug he did not drink, the way men hold tools when they have nothing to fix. On the drive, we practiced the sentences we would say to the world, the ones that contain only information and none of the trembling. We decided that if anyone asked how we were, we would use words like processing and following instructions, the phrases that allow strangers to keep their own balance. The attorney's office was the color of calm. Wood, books, a lamp that believed in soft light. Her name was Alice Hart. She had kind eyes and an alertness that suggested she could walk into a storm without needing to announce it. She explained how the deposit box worked, how the key my mother had left in her care would be matched, how the records would be signed, how we would be alone with whatever we found. Her words were the scaffolding we needed. At the bank, the vault corridor felt like a hymn. Cool air, dull shine. The attendant led us to a small room and placed the metal drawer on a table the way an altar receives a sacred object. The key turned. The metal sighed. Inside, folders, envelopes, patience. There were 3 envelopes with names in my mother's hand. One for my father, one for Mara, one for me. I lifted mine with a hesitation that was not fear exactly, more like reverence for the seconds on either side of a truth. When I opened it, the small resistance of the flap felt like a ceremony. Decisions and time, sealed, and now released. My Beth, she wrote. I gave you organization like a life raft. I am sorry for the ways it sometimes became a cage. I had to stop reading to breathe. Mara touched my arm. My father looked at the ceiling for a long beat, and then down again, as if he had negotiated something with the universe, and received permission to keep going. My letter contained the story from the night before, in my mother's own voice, not filtered through the executor's careful tone. It carried a date, a clinic that had since moved twice, a midwife's first name, a cousin's address from long ago. It carried the name again, our potential brother, a witness who had kept a photograph of a hospital bracelet, and sent a copy years later with a note. He has your eyes. The letter did not say whether she meant my mother or me. It did not matter. Some sentences are bridges either way. But beneath the letters were documents the law understands, notarized statements, adoption records with lines blacked out by policies that protect and sometimes erase, correspondence that had gone unanswered, then interrupted by time. There was also a single Polaroid, faded around the edges, of a woman, my mother or a reflection of her, standing in a doorway that belonged to another decade. The date on the bottom told me it was taken a week before the clinic visit. The expression on her face told me nothing and everything. Bravery has a way of disguising itself as stillness. Resistance showed up in all the ordinary ways. Mara's anger wore honesty like a coat she had outgrown and refused to discard. She should have told us, she said, over and over, like a metronome that refused another tempo. She should have told us when we were old enough to hold it without breaking. I did not disagree. I also did not agree. I was the eldest. My job was to let every sentence have its room before deciding which one we would eat from. My father's resistance was quieter. He read his letter twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in his jacket pocket close to his heart. I knew she had winters, he said. I did not know a seed had been planted in that snow. Then he looked at me as if to ask if this made him less of a husband in my eyes. It did not. People imagine marriages are lakes without hidden depths. They are oceans. Even the best swimmers do not touch every current. My own resistance sat between my ribs like a small, determined fist. I wanted to bless my mother for choosing repair at last. I wanted to argue with the clock for the years I had built my identity on a map that left out a country. I wanted to hold the name, and also hold my own, and not feel like the act of lifting, one would let the other drop. The attorney gave us privacy. The vault room gave us the strange mercy of bad carpet, And a good table. We made copies. We took notes. We built a timeline along the edge of the folder with sticky flags, anchoring our birthdays and hers, placing the clinic date like a star no one had charted for us before. When we stepped back into the world, it remained its practical self. Elevators, a mother with a stroller, a woman laughing into her phone, a taxi horn scolding no one in particular. I felt both invisible and exposed, like someone had opened a window in my chest and forgotten to close it. We did not go home right away. We drove to the old neighborhood where my mother had grown up, as if the streets might remember something the documents had not said. The corner store was a different store now, but the sidewalk still had that river of cracks near the curb where we used to float sticks on rainy days. I stood there and pictured my mother at 18, hair pulled back, shoulders squared the way she squared them when she had decided to do something that would cost her. I wanted to tell her that I forgave her. The air did not carry my words back in time, but the saying still did something inside me. Forgiveness is a muscle. Saying the word is one of the ways you train it. Back home, the dining table received the papers again. The family gathered because that is what families do when their story suddenly requires more chairs. Aunts and cousins came with casseroles and questions disguised as kindness. We answered only what we could. The room organized itself into small camps. The ones who felt protective of my mother's secrecy. The ones who felt wounded by it. The ones who tried to stand in both places until their legs trembled. When the house finally emptied, I found my father in the study, staring at the photograph of my mother that had always lived on the bookshelf. He spoke without turning.
Beth.
I should have asked more questions, he said. You asked the questions you knew how to ask, I told him. She gave the answers she knew how to survive. He nodded, then sat. Then let the chair hold him the way chairs are supposed to. I sat opposite him, and laid the name from the letter between us. Careful. As if I were putting down a small animal we hoped would trust us. We said the name aloud twice more. Saying a name is how you open a door. That night, I slept in my mother's room. I do not know why. Maybe because her absence was bigger there and had room to breathe without taking all of mine. I wrote in her journal, the one she had left half empty as if anticipating I might need the other half. I wrote, I am Beth. I am your eldest. I am learning you again. Words stayed ink, but they also crawled into the walls and did their quiet work. We would start the search in the morning. The clinic, the midwife's name, the cousin who might still be reachable, the attorney's researcher, who had access to maps I did not know existed. Somewhere, there was a man who shared my mother's eyes, or mine, or none of ours, but still carried our history in the way he walked down a street. I did not know if he would want to be found. That fear sat with me, and did not apologize. I told it to sit in the corner and keep its voice down. Eldest daughters can be firm when the room requires it. I fell asleep holding the letter, exactly the way I should have held my newborn brother if the world had allowed it. I do not say that to reopen a wound. I say it because truth, once named, prefers complete sentences. If this kind of quiet storytelling helps you breathe, you are welcome here. You can subscribe and stay close. We will keep walking this road together. The next day began with a string of small, brave calls. The clinic number had changed. The old number offered a recording with the new one, which felt like a mercy. The new clinic receptionist did not know how to archive pain, but she knew how to route calls. I gave my name, my mother's name, the year, the month, the hint of a midwife's first name. I hesitated on the word adoption because it carries 100 rooms inside it. The receptionist placed me on hold. Hold music is so cheerful it feels like a dare. While I waited, I opened my mother's letter again, and found the line where she wrote, "If love could have paid, I would not have owed." I touched the paper, as if it could feel the way I forgave her for not being divine. The clinic connected me to a records coordinator, who spoke like a person who takes her work home, because she knows it follows her anyway. She explained the rules, the redactions, the doors she could not open, the ones she could with a signature and proof of relation. She asked me to send the attorney's letter and gave me an email address that sounded like a person and not a department. Her name was Nina. I said thank you, and meant more than the call required. Mara took the midwife's name and became a detective. She called the library where the old city directories live in drawers that smell like paper and dust. She found a last name attached to the first, and a list of addresses that mapped a life across 5 blocks. She texted me a photo of the page with the neat pencil circles she had drawn. My sister has the kind of hope that makes you want to deserve it. My father called the cousin. She had moved 3 times and kept one of the old numbers for reasons no one could explain. She answered on the second ring and cried before saying hello. Some people grieve for you after you die. Others begin earlier because they have held a secret too long, and it has worn holes in their pockets. By afternoon, the attorney called to say the bank had confirmed the chain of custody, and we could retrieve a second file my mother had left under a different tag. We drove back together. The city looked the same, and not at all the same. We passed a park where I had once taught Mara to skate. Children fell and rose with that stubborn joy childhood wears. I remembered the day my mother sat on that very bench pretending to read, while keeping both hands ready for catching. Maybe she had been catching more than I knew. The second file was thinner, but sharper. It contained letters my mother had written but never mailed. One was to a man whose name was new to us. The letter was not accusing or romantic. It was factual and kind, the voice of a woman who had learned how to speak to the past without begging. She told him the date. She told him the clinic. She told him she had carried the memory as both penance and proof. She did not ask for anything. She wrote, "I am telling you because I do not want to die with this sentence unspoken." There was no address on the envelope. There was only the letter. Some truths are meant to be said even if they have nowhere to go. The file also held a photocopy of a hospital log with initials and times and a notation beside my mother's first name that looked like a star and a small letter M. Nina would later tell me that notation belonged to the midwife's shift that night. Initials are often doors with tiny keys. We had the first key. We needed the second. We went home and built a new map on the dining table. We added string between pages because it felt like the sort of case that deserved visible threads. I am aware of how theatrical that sounds. Grief makes detectives out of people who have only ever organized grocery lists. We must forgive ourselves for the theater. It keeps us moving. When evening came, our house filled again. Not with relatives this time, but with the kind of quiet that allows a thought to become a decision. Mara typed names into databases that the attorney's researcher had recommended we use, the ones that show people's old addresses like footprints. My father called a former neighbor who remembers everything because she always looked out her window when the rest of us were busy pretending our lives were not worth witnessing. At 9, Nina called back from the clinic. She said the midwife had retired to a town an hour outside the city. She offered a name and a phone number and paused, as if preparing us for an ordinary miracle. "She remembers your mother," Nina said. "She remembers that night." It is a strange thing when the world agrees to share a memory you did not know anyone else kept. I wrote the midwife's number on a clean page, as if paper quality could guarantee the outcome, and dialed. A woman answered. Her voice carried years inside it the way certain songs do. I said my name. I said my mother's name. I said the month and the season, and the way my mother's letter had described the room, the curtain, the kindness that had shown up like an extra pair of hands. "I remember," the woman said, and I could hear her smile even as her breath snagged on a piece of the past. "Your mother was very brave. She did not cry. She held onto the bed into my wrist and she hummed a hymn and a key I did not know. I asked if she remembered a bracelet, a name tag, any small clue we could hold. I remember a boy," she said. "I remember eyes that look like winter when the sun is kind." I do not know how long we spoke. long enough to learn that the midwife had saved her old notebooks in a box that had moved with her 3 times, because she could not make herself throw away the proof that women had borne the world in front of her. She promised to look for the page from that night. She asked for my address. She asked me to tell my mother that she was proud of her. I said I would and meant it, even though I knew the sentence would land in a room where the bed had already been made and the window had been opened to the good air. After I hung up, Mara leaned her head on my shoulder and wept in earnest for the first time. My father stood in the doorway and did not enter, as if giving us the dignity of being sisters alone. When he finally crossed the threshold, he placed his hand on both of our heads, the way a pastor does, and said, "May we be equal to what is asked." And I remembered why I had always trusted him to carry heavy things. Before sleep, I wrote again in my mother's journal. Day 2. Contact made. The world is kinder than I expected and harder than I hoped. I am Beth. I am learning to let the story speak with its full voice. I put the pen down and said the name out loud one more time. It had already begun to change shape in my mouth, from shock to invitation, from stranger to a door that might open. The midwife's envelope arrived 2 days later, thin as a bird and heavier than the table. Inside, a single notebook leaf protected by a plastic sleeve, brittle at the edges where decades had chewed. Old ink. Careful columns. The page wore the night like a fragrance, a date, a room number, my mother's full name, a small hand-drawn star, the initial of the midwife, and a brief note in the margin that felt like a blessing disguised as data. Infant male. Clear cry. Eyes steady. Mother, brave. The word brave lives differently on paper than it does in memory. On paper it stands upright. In memory it trembles and persists. Nina had also sent an email with a clipped scan of a hospital ledger that matched the midwife's page. A second column contained initials that, when cross-referenced with an archival code, pointed to the receiving desk of a social service office that no longer existed under that name. The file trail ended the way old rivers end, absorbed by ground that has forgotten it was once a bed. Thread by thread, the map came into focus. My mother had not invented this history to justify a clause. The world had been a witness, and we had found enough witnesses to call what we felt by its right name, true. But revelation is not only the light that arrives, it is also the shadow it exposes. The shadow entered our house through a drawer. We had gathered again that afternoon to sort the papers into piles that made a kind of sense. My aunt, Elaine, the one who always measured the weather from the window, hovered at the edge of the dining room like a person negotiating which century to occupy. He had brought lemon bars and a face arranged into sympathy. When I placed the midwife's page on the table, her eyes flicked to it, and then away. The small choreography of a guilt that has practiced looking at flaws. Brave, she read aloud, because the human mouth cannot help itself around that word. Yes, I said. She was. Elaine nodded, the long, slow nod of a woman who knows how to perform agreement. She set down the dessert and began straightening the stack of napkins she had brought, which did not need straightening. My sister's gaze sharpened the way hers does when a line will not sit right on a page. You can hide many things from many people. You cannot hide from the youngest child who learned to read a room to survive it. Where did the letters go? Mara asked quietly. The ones he might have sent, if he ever tried. Someone would have received them. Someone would have decided what to do. Elaine's hand stilled. The napkins lay perfectly aligned, already aligned, always aligned. She kept smoothing them as if order were a spell she could cast to silence the past. What letters? She said. Not a question. A closed door shaped like a sentence. I grew up inside the grammar of Elaine's denials. They were always tidy, always low-voiced, never crude enough to admit how much damage a quiet no can cause. I felt the eldest daughter waken me, the one who knows which tone opens a drawer. Elaine, I said, using her name the way the truth uses a key. Where did the letters go? She did not look at me. She looked at the midwife's page as if it were a mirror, and she did not like what it reflected. "Your mother asked me to make sure the house did not become a topic," she said. "She was trying to live a life. So was your father. So were all of us. You do not know what it was like then. People talked. People made small things into punishments. I kept the peace." Mara stepped closer. "You kept the peace," she repeated, and the echo turned the phrase into its opposite. "With whose letters?" Elaine breathed in, breathed out, decided on a posture, walked to the sideboard that has belonged to our family longer than any of us, and slid open the shallow top drawer, the one we were told was only for placemats and good scissors. She reached beneath the felt liner and lifted a thin cardboard box, the kind that once held ribbon from a dress shop. She set it on the table without ceremony. The lid stuck for a second, the way lids do when they have learned what they are guarding. Elaine loosened it and removed a stack of envelopes bound together with kitchen twine. I knew the twine. My mother looped it around every bundle that mattered. For a second the room blurred and then returned. The envelopes were addressed to my mother's maiden name, and to the married one she took after. Careful, hopeful, formal, plain. The postmarks belonged to years when I was learning to write, and years when I was learning to forgive, and years when I did not yet know forgiveness would be asked of me this specifically. On half of them, a rubber stamp bled a verdict. Return to sender. On others, a hand had written forwarding not available, and on the back flap of more than one, a small initial courtesy of our house's gatekeeper, E, marked the decision no one had asked her to make on our behalf. Mara touched the bundle the way you touch a living thing that might bolt. "You kept them," she said. "You took them from the mailbox or from the hall table before she came home, and you kept them." Elaine did not cry. Women like Elaine do not weep while they defend, they firm. They find their convictions and wear them like armor that has known both shine and dent. "I read one," she admitted. "The first one. It asked for nothing. It was a name and a question and a hope with no address to return to. I felt the house tilt. I thought of your father, and the neighbors, and the churchwomen who would have turned a life into a hobby. I thought of your mother's hands shaking when she was tired. I thought of your birthdays. She had a husband. She had you. She had order. I chose order." "You chose silence," I said. "I chose mercy," she countered. The room divided itself into air you could breathe and air you could not. My father entered on the edge of that border and stood still, the way men do when the earthquake has finished and the aftershock threatens to introduce itself. "What is this?" he asked, already knowing, because sometimes the body recognizes a scene before the mind writes the caption. "The letters," I said. He moved toward the table and placed both hands on the wood as if it were the rail of a ship. He looked at the postmarks. He looked at the initial on the back flaps. He looked at Elaine, and did not reach for courtesy first. "You took from my wife what was addressed to her," he said. His voice did not rise. It deepened. "You decided what our house could bear. You made a private policy and called it love. I prevented ruin." Elaine said, "You know what our mother would have done, what people would have said, what jobs can become when gossip gets between a person and their mourning. I kept you all from the humiliation of it." "Humiliation is not a poison," my father answered. "It is a feeling. What you did was a theft." The sentence landed and stayed. I felt the first banked spark of my anger go bright enough to heat the palms. I asked for water. It is what I do when fire and words arrive together. Elaine reached for the twine, perhaps to put the lid back on history. I placed my hand gently on hers and shook my head. We stood like that for a breath, and I felt the bones of her fingers under the skin. The proof that even those who have done harm are made of the same materials as the harmed. It is a terrible mercy to feel this in the middle of a reveal. "I am not your enemy," she said. and it almost sounded like a plea. "You are part of the story," I replied. "We will decide the rest later." Mara untied the twine. The knots yielded like tired guard dogs. She pulled one envelope free and turned it over carefully. The return address was a post office box in a city our mother had visited twice in the last 10 years, on what she called errands she liked to do alone. The handwriting on the front was unsteady but deliberate, the ink a little smudged near the stamp as if a thumb had pressed too long on the future. Inside, a single page. "Dear Helen, if this is not your address, forgive me. If you are not the Helen I am looking for, forgive me. If you are, I am not asking for anything. I would only like to say I am well, that a kind couple raised me gentle, that I have wondered about your hands and your voice all my life, and if you want no contact, I promise to disappear at once. I only need you to know I am grateful you brought me safely to a world that has been good to me more often than not. I hope you have known goodness too. With respect, Gabriel." The name worked like light on a locked room. Gabriel. Not only initials in a ledger, not only a mystery rehearsed by generations of silence, a man with a name that had spent years waiting at the curb of our story. He had not made demands. He had offered a kindness so large it made my throat ache, the promise to leave if asked. Mercy, even on the doorstep of his own birth. My father sank into a chair and covered his face with both hands. Mara stood very straight, the way a person stands in a courtroom when they have decided to say exactly what they saw. Elaine sat too. Finally, the lemon bars untouched like little squares of a sweetness we could not yet afford. "Why did you keep it?" I asked Elaine, not as a prosecutor now, but as a daughter starving for the logic that had fed this machine. She stared at the page for a long time, and then said the first honest thing I had ever heard her say about the past. "Because I was afraid that if a door opened, I would lose my place in the house," she whispered. "I had helped raise you. I had given my years to this family. I knew what it cost to be the useful woman no one sees. I thought if he came, I would be asked to move further into the hallway. I chose against him, because I chose for me. I am sorry. I did not know how to be brave yet." A silence followed, that was not a barricade this time. It was a room where a new kind of breath might be possible. Revelation does not end in applause. It ends in the difficult arrangement of chairs. We reseated ourselves around the truth. We placed Gabriel's letter beside the midwife's note, and the ledger scan and my mother's handwriting where she had written, "Let it be done." Together these papers formed a chord the house could no longer ignore. "We will write to him," I said. "We will not ask Elaine's permission. We will not ask the old rules to bless us. We will write, and we will tell him what the will could not carry, and what the letter tried to carry, and what this ribbon box failed to deliver." My father nodded slowly, like a man rewriting a decade inside his chest. "We will ask for a meeting," he added. "Not a demand, an invitation. If he refuses, we will bless the refusal and count it as a right. If he accepts, we will make a table big enough to include the years we lost." Mara exhaled a tremor, and then steadied. "And we will tell him we are sorry," she said. "We will say it without excuses and without architecture." Elaine looked at me as if the floor had become a language she did not speak. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked. "I want you to stay," I said, "to watch how repair is done. We may ask you to say the words to him yourself, not for our punishment of you, but for your own release." She nodded. A small gesture, a door unlocking one quiet click. That night, I sat at my mother's desk and drafted a letter. I wrote in my own hand, which looks nothing like hers, and a little like my father's. A bridge between the two lessons I have lived. I told Gabriel the truth we now had, each piece with the dignity of its date. I told him about the clause in the will, and the way the word recognition had earned its light. I told him we would honor whatever boundary he placed, that our invitation was not a summons, that our love would not perform hunger on his doorstep. I told him my name. I told him I was the eldest. I told him I was learning to brave what my mother could not. I wrote the sentence I had wanted someone to write to me when I was 10, and thought adulthood would be easier than it is. You do not owe us a reunion, I wrote. But if you want a table, we will set it. I signed it. I sealed it. I placed it on the hall table and put a small stone on top. The one my mother kept from a beach where she had once said she felt the world listening. I asked the stone to hold the envelope until morning. Before bed, I opened my mother's journal again and wrote a single line. Revelation arrived with equal parts light and shadow. We will carry both. I turned off the lamp. The house practiced its night. Pipes, wind in the tree. The slow business of photographs in their frames agreeing to keep their places one more hour. Sleep came neither like a cat nor a quilt. It came like a visitor who had waited on the porch until I opened the door. It laid down in the chair near the window and said, I will keep watch while you rest. I believed it. Morning would ask us to send the letter. Morning would ask us to call a number on a post office box card and see if the world still forwarded hope. Morning would introduce the task of making room, real room, for the person whose name had lived in our house all along, barred only by twine and fear. Forgiveness is not a verdict. It is a practice. The courtroom closed a long time ago. What remains is a room with a table, 4 chairs, and the work of speaking without making anyone smaller. We mailed the letter to Gabriel on a Wednesday morning, because Wednesdays have the dignity of the middle. At the post office, the clerk weighed our envelope as if hope had ounces. When she slid it into the outgoing bin, it felt like watching a ship back away from the dock. No fanfare. Just the quiet physics of departure. Mara squeezed my elbow. My father stood a step behind us, hands in his pockets, as if giving the letter the privacy of its own leaving. On the walk home, the city carried on. Garbage truck, schoolyard shouts, a woman teaching her dog the difference between wait and stay. I have always liked the dog's version of those words. Not compliance exactly, but attention with a heartbeat. Forgiveness is like that. Not surrender. Not forgetfulness. Attention with a heartbeat. We began awkwardly with the person in reach. Elaine. It happened in the dining room, because the dining room refused to surrender its jurisdiction. The lemon bars were back, this time cut smaller, as if restraint might apologize for everything restraint had already ruined. Elaine sat with her palms on her knees, a schoolgirl's posture on an older frame. My father brought water and not coffee, which was mercy, because coffee asks people to perform energy. I was wrong, Elaine said before anyone else could speak, the sentence coming out like a key finding its door. I was wrong to take what did not belong to me. I was wrong to choose a version of peace that required a theft. I do not know how to be forgiven for years. Mara's mouth trembled, but her voice did not. You do not have to be forgiven for years, she said. Only for a moment that kept dragging them behind it. I looked at Elaine the way you look at a bridge from the bank, calculating span, wind, the weight of what must cross. I remembered the smallness of her fears, and the largeness of the harm her smallness had caused. I remembered how she taught me to press the hems of curtains because edges deserve respect. And I remembered her laughter in our kitchen on the afternoon I graduated, and she insisted on ironing my robe, then cried at the door when she thought no one was looking. Human beings do not stay in one category for long. They spill. There is a path, I said. You will not carve it with apologies alone. You will carve it by participating in repair. What do I do? She asked, not with defiance this time, but with that holy poverty humility wears. You will help us remail what you kept, I said. You will write your own letter to Gabriel, not to claim him or to cleanse yourself, but to acknowledge the harm and to ask nothing back. You will tell him you are ready to hand the door to us, and to him, without guarding it any more. Elaine nodded, relief and terror wrestling politely on her face. I can do that, she said. I can begin. Mara placed the ribbon box on the table. We opened the envelopes we could safely forward under Council's guidance. We attached our letter as the true address at last. We wrote a cover note that did not plead and did not instruct, the way you speak when you are learning how to let someone else decide the next verb. That night, sleep came as it had promised. A visitor who kept watch. In the morning, the world offered us the first sign that repair can move faster than despair's predictions. An email from a clean new address, simple and formal. Subject: Your letter. From Gabriel. The body contained 5 lines. Dear Beth, thank you for writing. I received your letter this morning. I am grateful for your tone and your care. I don't know what I can carry yet, but I would like to meet. With respect, Gabriel. Mara gasped and covered her mouth. My father sat down without meaning to. Elaine closed her eyes and whispered something that might have been a prayer, or a thank you to a god she scolded more than she praised. I reread the lines until their simplicity registered as courage. We wrote back, me, with Council's blessing, and suggested a public place first, quiet but neutral. The botanical garden, early, when paths still remember night. Gabriel agreed. Saturday, 10 in the morning. He signed with the same modesty that had steadied me. With respect. Forgiveness is a road you walk in your shoes. No one can carry you. Still, there is holiness in the way people will walk beside you if you let them. On Saturday, our feet found the gravel of the garden path. The map at the entrance offered a perfect metaphor. Zones arranged by season. A lake shaped like a question mark. A footbridge named for a donor who had believed in small crossings. He stood near the koi pond, hands in his jacket pockets, posture easy but contained, the way people stand when they have been asked for too much in this life, but have not learned bitterness's worst song. He looked up. He had our mother's eyes when the sun is kind. He had my father's way of tilting his head when he listens. He had none of our faces, and all of our history. Beth, he said. Not a question. A welcome. He said Mara's name with equal care, and my father's with a steady calm that made me want to sit on a bench and weep for all the benches that had waited empty for this moment. We did not hug. We did not perform reunion. We walked. It is difficult to narrate the shape of that first hour, without either heightening or diminishing it. The truth is plainer and more sacred than either. We let sentences build a bridge plank by plank. He told us of the couple who had raised him, a barber and a teacher who kept a jar for small things and a garden for larger ones. He told us he had never been unloved, which felt like an undeserved mercy and then like a rightful one. He said he had tried to find our mother twice, once at 25, and once when his own son was born, and both times the road ended in a mailbox that returned what it was given. We told him how our house had kept order like a religion, and secrets like an heirloom. We told him about my mother's letter and the clause and the awful nobility of the word recognition. We told him we did not come to recalculate a ledger. We came because a map had been corrected, and the right road was now visible. Do you hate her? Mara asked. Because the youngest can ask what the eldest will translate later. No, he said. Then, after a long breath, I have hated the shape of certain years, but not your mother. Do you hate us? I asked, a question that did not ask for mercy, but for surgical honesty. No, he said again, and the second no built a pier on which a day could stand. He had brought a folder, as if the universe were committed to keeping this story on paper long enough for us to bless it properly. Inside, a photocopy of the hospital bracelet photograph we had seen, plus 2 more images. His graduation, his child with icing on his cheeks, the kind of domestic immortality Polaroids grant. He had also brought a letter he had written to my mother 2 years ago, and never mailed, because he had not found an address he trusted. He read a line from it out loud. "If we never meet, I will still be grateful to you every morning I wake." I made a sound I have never made in public, a small, helpless thing, and then contained it the way adults are taught to contain the holy. Forgiveness, I learned as we moved beneath the cherry trees, is not a declaration you issue once the weather is perfect. It is a muscle you warm with small motions. It is a hand you put out, even if you are not certain the other hand will reach. It is slow faith. We sat on a bench near the fern walk. My father spoke without guarding himself. "I loved your mother with everything I knew how to use," he said. "I did not know about the winter before me. I am sorry for the doors that stayed shut." Gabriel nodded. "I did not bring a courtroom," he said. "I brought a map. If the road ends here, I will honor that. If it continues, I will walk it with the pace that keeps everyone whole." "Let it continue," I said. "Slowly, so the bridge learns its weight." We agreed on small next steps. Another meeting, this time with photographs of my mother he could take with him. A lunch with just the three of us and one spare seat, in case Elaine needed to say her own sentence out loud and hand back a guard she had appointed herself to be. He did not insist. He allowed the plan to have modesty. Before we parted, he looked at the koi and said, almost to himself, "I have spent so long being generous to a world that might never return it. I do not know how to receive this without breaking something else." I understood. Forgiveness asks you to rearrange shelves, and sometimes things fall. If this moment felt like a small door opening, tap the like. It tells the platform to carry gentle stories a little farther. "Then we will go slow," I said. "We will wrap the fragile things and put them on lower shelves for a while. We will not ask you to perform how happy you are. We will make room for you, or I don't know yet." He smiled, not wide, but true. "Thank you," he said, "for the right to not know." On the way out, we paused on the footbridge named for the donor. Beneath us, water insisted on being water. A bird carried a stick longer than its own body and did not apologize. Two children argued about whether the orange fish were the same as yesterday's, or if new fish had joined during the night. The world, I remembered, is always practicing inclusion. At home that afternoon, we laid out photographs of my mother on the dining table, the way we have learned to lay everything important, and chose 3 to send with a note. One from her 20s, hair pinned, gaze lifted to something you cannot see. One from our childhood kitchen, flower on her wrist like a bracelet. One from last year, face thin, but light intact. On the back of each, we wrote a line. The day she learned she could manage more than a house. The day she taught us cinnamon means mercy. The day she said she was not afraid of the truth anymore. We also wrote to Elaine's dictation, slow and exacting. "Gabriel," she said, eyes on the table. "I kept your letters. I did not have the right. I was afraid of losing my place, and made you lose your door. I am sorry. If you want me to say this to you in person, I will. If you prefer I leave the room from now on, I will do that too. I will do what repair asks of me." We printed it exactly so. That night, I returned to my mother's journal and wrote, "Forgiveness began today. It did not feel like victory. It felt like being allowed to set down a heavy box and rest my hands on my knees. It felt like the smallest quarter turn of a key. I closed the book and placed it under the lamp, not to hide it but to give it the gentle shade that keeps paper from fading. Outside, the neighborhood made its nightly vows, porch lights on, dogs announcing what they can, a train somewhere far promising to take someone else toward their own reckoning. Inside, we breathed like a house learning its new inhabitants. Tomorrow would be the ritual, the gesture our hands can make when our mouths have said enough for a day. Words took us this far. Hands would have to take us the rest of the way. We chose Sunday afternoon for the ritual, because Sundays still carry my mother's handwriting. The house had that quiet between church bells and casseroles, a hush that belongs to kitchens that remember both. We did not invite the whole family. Repair requires a small quorum at first, just those willing to be changed by what they witness. It would be us four, my father, Mara, me, and two guests, Gabriel and Elaine, who asked to come even though her mouth had not yet learned how to sit still inside shame without recruiting defense. I said yes. A ritual is a classroom. People must be allowed to pass or fail honestly in front of the altar. We cleared the dining table and left only what mattered. My mother's journal, open to a blank page. A shallow clay bowl filled with water from the kitchen tap. Ordinary water, the kind miracles prefer. The ribbon box with the kept letters, the twine removed. 3 stones from the beach my mother loved. A taper candle and a match from the junk drawer that has, against all odds, held its community of paper clips and rubber bands for 20 years. No flowers, no linen, no performative grace. Only the materials you would find in any house where people still live. When Gabriel arrived, he stood in the doorway and looked at the table the way one looks at the first stage of a bridge. His hands were empty. This felt right. He had brought himself. This was everything. Elaine came with a legal pad that she did not need, and a pen, as if the ritual would require minutes. I asked her to put both on the hall table, and bring only her breath. We did not open with a speech. My father lit the candle, and the room arranged itself around the small conviction of flame. Fire does not solve. It witnesses. This is not a ceremony to erase, I said. It is to mark. We are not fixing the past. We are asking the past to look at us while we tell it what happens next. We began with names. Not full biographies, not rehearsed testimonies. Only names, first our own, then the names of those who could not be present, but lived inside our sentences. I said, Beth, and pictured the 10-year-old who had believed adulthood would stop the ache at the border of every family story. Mara said, Mara. And I saw her at 12, a hurricane of mercy looking for an ocean. My father said Daniel, and I saw him putting on a tie decades ago, practicing steady breath in a mirror, while the world pressed its thumb into his chest and asked him to be a wall for the rest of us. Gabriel said his name last, quietly, as if offering it without asking the room to kneel before it. When he spoke, something that had been hovering finally chose a chair. Then the water. I took the bowl and set it in the center where the ledger had once sat, where casseroles had introduced themselves, where school forms had waited for signatures after dinner. We each dropped one of the beach stones into the bowl, and the water made that relieved sound water makes when it is allowed to hold weight that had been held by hands too long. For the weight the paper could not carry, I said. For the years you lived without us, Mara added, looking at Gabriel, not as a demand, but as an apology that had found its right side. For what I did not ask, and did not want to see, my father said. He reached for the 3rd stone, then changed his mind, and placed his palm flat on the table instead, as if promising the wood it would no longer have to brace against secrets. Elaine stood with her fingers pressed together, as if practicing a new prayer. For the door I guarded, she said at last, and for the keys I am returning. Then she took a breath that sounded like a hinge accepting oil, and let it out without a word. We turned to the letters. There were many. Thin envelopes with a poor man's mercy, cheap paper and good intention. We would not burn them. Fire is not a trash can. It is a mouth. We would not feed these pages to hunger. We would redress them. This was the ritual, to redirect what had been captured by fear back toward the person it had asked for. On each envelope, we wrote the address we now shared with Gabriel's permission. On each, we wrote a date in the corner. Not the postmark's old date, but today's date, because today is also real, because today deserves a page. On the back of each, where Elaine's initial had once made a small empire out of a letter, We wrote together an amendment in plain print. Delivered at last. For those without return addresses, those that had never known how to come back from the world, we placed them in a separate stack. We would not pretend knowledge in front of ignorance. We would acknowledge the loss without dressing it in costume. We slid that stack under the journal as if tucking a child in. Some pages choose to sleep inside books. It is not burial. It is rest. Then the bowl again. I dipped my fingers and touched the corners of 3 envelopes the way my mother once touched our foreheads, leaving the house on mornings she feared we might meet a day sharper than we were. I passed the bowl to Gabriel. He smiled, brief and grateful, then did the same. The water made its case. Ordinary is holy enough. Elaine's turn came. She took 1 envelope, then another, then a third, and her mouth trembled. Not for what she had done, she had rehearsed that, but for what she was being asked to do now. Participate. She dipped and touched and whispered, "Go where you were meant to go." The sentence was simple. Truth often is when we finally let it be. We needed one more act. Something that invited our bodies to learn what our heads were saying. I took the journal and wrote a line at the top of the blank page in my neatest hand. What we will no longer keep. Under it, we each penned 1 sentence we pledged to release. I wrote, "I will not keep the belief that my place depends on my usefulness." Mara wrote, "I will not keep the habit of making rage carry grief's luggage." My father wrote, "I will not keep the metric that measured my marriage by what I did not know." Elaine wrote, slowly, as if each letter asked to be convinced, "I will not keep other people's mail or their lives." Gabriel wrote last, "I will not keep the reflex to leave before I am asked to stay." We did not initial it like a contract. We did not read it aloud like a vow. We closed the cover and set the journal beneath the candle where the leather could warm. Heat, not flame. Presence, not spectacle. "Now we eat," my father said, and the room returned to its oldest wisdom. We set the table, but set 1 extra place, knife, fork, plate, and an empty chair. Not for the dead, for the years. Ritual is a tutor in hospitality. You must seat what has not yet learned how to behave. We passed the food without commentary. We let the clink of glasses and the scrape of cutlery keep time. Twice, laughter tried to join and failed. On the 3rd attempt, it made it through. Gabriel told a story about his son and a birthday cake that slid sideways as if sleepwalking. Mara told the one about my mother's cinnamon rolls and the year we mistook salt for sugar. My father told a story I had never heard. The day my mother looked at a broken faucet and decided she would not wait for anyone, learning the wrench's grammar until the water listened. Halfway through, I stood and brought in a small wrapped parcel. I had stayed up late the night before, making it with my hands the way frightened people bake bread. It was a book. Photographs I had scanned and printed and bound. On the spine, I wrote, "Helen," in her own light. Inside, pictures where she was not performing mother or wife or useful woman. Only person. One where her hair is wet, and she is laughing like rain. One where she is at the laundromat reading a novel with her foot against the machine as if rocking a baby made of metal. One where she is walking away from the camera toward a horizon that is not obligated to explain itself. I placed the book in Gabriel's hands. "There is more than these," I said. "But this is a start." He did not open it. He held it the way people hold inner faith. Careful, sincere, unwilling to pretend they understand all the rituals, but ready to bow to the ones that make a human larger. "Thank you," he said, a small sentence that made room around itself like light. We ended the meal the way my mother ended difficult days, by washing dishes together without comment. Soap, heat, the kindness of a towel moving without judgment across what has held heat and hunger. Gabriel took the drying. He learned quickly where the plates live. Elaine asked where to put the dessert forks, and when Mara answered, placed them there as if laying down a weapon. One last act remained. Night had entered the windows, and the candle had become the brightest thing in the room. We gathered again at the table, and I lifted the bowl. The stones lay quietly under the surface, heavy and obedient. In our family, I said, we have called order mercy and silence safety. Today we have learned their limits. Today we ask for another teacher. I carried the bowl to the sink and poured the water slowly, then set the stones one by one on a hand towel to dry. We would place them in the garden tomorrow under the hydrangea my mother loved, not to bury the weight, stones do not forget, but to return it to a place where roots take what is heavy and make it bloom. Before we parted, Elaine asked to read something. She took an index card from her pocket. Rituals always tempt an index card. I nodded. She read 2 sentences, her voice soft and without posture. I was useful in your mother's house, she said. I want to be kind in yours. Gabriel nodded and did not answer. Forgiveness deserves silence to ripen inside of. At the door, he shook my father's hand, then Mara's, then mine. His grip held warmth and restraint in exact proportion, like someone who has learned to carry both hope and caution without letting either bully the other. Elaine stood off to the side, waiting to be told whether her presence would be allowed in the next chapter. Gabriel, with the gentleness of a man who has practiced exits for years, turned to her and said, I will read your letter. It was both boundary and invitation. It was precisely right. When the house closed behind him, and the hall swallowed the last sound of his steps, we stood in the kitchen and let quiet fill the room that used to hide us from ourselves. The candle guttered once and steadied. I blew it out. Smoke wrote a brief cursive in the air and then withdrew. The room looked ordinary again. We had done something extraordinary and no one outside would ever know. This is how most holy things happen. Without witnesses, no medals, only a shift in the furniture of a life. In my mother's journal, I added one more line before bed. Ritual completed. We redirected what fear detained. Stones drying for the garden. We ate with an extra chair. The house learned a new breath. Tomorrow would be the return. Not to what was, but to a world that knows our true names and asks us to live them without rehearsal. We would go back to work, and bills, and the gravel of the garden path where the map keeps its promises. We would see if the bridge holds when ordinary feet cross it. Return is not a circle. It is a spiral. You come back to the same rooms with different lungs. On Monday, the house resumed its ordinary noises. Trash truck, kettle, a neighbor's radio insisting on the oldies, as if time could be negotiated by chorus. The ritual's candle sat rinsed on the counter, wick pale, like a witness between trials. The 3 beach stones waited in a bowl by the back door, dry now, clean in the way things are clean when they have been asked to carry weight and did not break. We did not speak of heroism. We spoke of errands. Mara returned to her studio and stood in front of the blank canvas she had abandoned a month ago. She told me later she dipped a brush into a color our mother would have called kitchen light, and laid a single stroke near the center, not vertical, not horizontal, a small diagonal that said, I am here. My father went to the hardware store for sand and soil, and came back with marigold starts because he has always believed orange is the language of survival. I brewed tea, and opened my mother's journal to the page where we had written what we would no longer keep. I read it once and closed the cover, not as refusal, but as an agreement to let the page do its work without supervision. By noon, an email, not from Gabriel, from Nina at the clinic. Beth, the midwife, found one more index entry in her notebook that might be useful. It mentions a social worker whose name appears in an old staffing list. I am attaching the scan. I do not want to raise hopes beyond what records can offer, but I believe this is one more step. With care, Nina. Hope does not need to be large. It needs to be precise. A proper noun is sometimes enough. I forwarded the note to our attorney, and added it to the timeline on the dining table. The map of our life had grown complicated and right. I looked at the string between places and dates, and remembered being a child with yarn and tape, pretending I could lasso the moon if I only found the correct angle. In the afternoon, Gabriel wrote. I read Elaine's letter. Thank you for not making it my job to ease anyone else's conscience. I am willing to meet with her when the time is right. Not before. I have received the photographs. I carried the one with flower on your mother's wrist in my pocket all morning like a weather report I could trust. My son wants to meet you both. Slowly would still be good. Saturday next week. Same garden. With respect, Gabriel. I read the lines aloud to my father and Mara. We did not cheer. We nodded. The way people nod when the bridge takes one more footstep and does not complain. We planted the stones under the hydrangea that evening, folding the soil back with the patience of people who no longer confuse speed with healing. My father used the spade with the tenderness you bring to a child's haircut. Mara pressed the dirt with both palms, as if promising the roots that people would keep their word here. I watered. The water sunk without sound, and for a moment, the plant looked brighter, as if it had been thirsty for us, and not only for the rain. Return requires the courage to let life be ordinary after it has been holy. The next days behave like days, which is their service. We worked, we ate, we returned calls. We said the name Gabriel without needing to calibrate how much of our face it was allowed to occupy. We did not hover at the window for the mail carrier the way characters do in shows where the plot depends on envelopes. When a letter comes, it comes. When it does not, the world is still full. There were small repairs we did not announce. I found 3 of Elaine's napkins still folded in the ribbon box and washed them by hand, the motion of the cloth between my fingers a prayer for uses that hurt less. Mara mailed a slim parcel to the barber shop and the school where Gabriel had grown up. Copies of 2 photographs he had asked to share with the people he calls his parents. On the back she wrote, "Thank you for loving him." Simple, true, undesigned. My father wrote a letter to the church secretary, requesting a note in the archive to add my mother's maiden name to our family baptism records. An act that changed nothing and changed everything. A tiny correction in a ledger that will outlast us. I imagined some future archivist reading down the line and seeing the extra name and feeling permission to breathe. Saturday came quiet and clear. We returned to the garden. The koi were doing their honest labor of being coy. Gabriel came with a boy whose eyes had that bright, assessing kindness children own when they have been told the truth in words they can carry. "This is Isaac," Gabriel said. "He is 9. He likes maps." Isaac shook my hand with a seriousness that made me want to kneel and ask him if he recognized any of my features. Instead, I asked if he would like to see the bridge with the donor's name. He said yes, in the tone of a person who understands that bridges are not only made of wood and bolts. We walked. We did not attempt to stitch a decade in one afternoon. We let the air hold what our mouths could not. Isaac asked questions the way children do when adults have taught them. Curiosity is a form of courtesy. "Was your mother good at fixing things?" he asked, and my father told him about the faucet and the wrench. "Did she have a favorite animal?" And Mara said the stray cat who never let itself be owned, but always came to the back stoop when the weather threatened. "Did she like stories?" And I said, "Before you go, tell me one word you are ready to reclaim in your own story. I will be here reading. If someone you love needs a softer night, you can share this with them."